It was 3 a.m. A taxi driver pulled up to pick up a young woman with a heavy suitcase. She gave the driver an address near a local park, a place where few people should be at this time of night. But what he doesn't know, what no one would have guessed at that moment, is that in the trunk of his taxi lies something far more disturbing. Human remains, scattered pieces of a life that had been violently taken just hours before. But how did someone so seemingly innocent end up committing a crime that would shake South Korea to its core? This is the story of Jung Yoo-jeong, a woman obsessed with true crime who turned into a killer. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more, thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse, glorify, or condone any of the criminal actions or individuals described in this case. Viewer discretion is advised. Jung Yoo-jeong was just 23 years old, a seemingly quiet and unassuming young woman. On the surface, she appeared like anyone you might pass by on a busy street, perhaps a little reserved, a little shy, but nothing about her seemed capable of the violence that would soon unfold. She wasn't the type of person you'd expect to commit a crime, especially one as heinous as murder. But Jung had a fascination, a dangerous obsession with crime, particularly with the grisly details of murders. This obsession didn't just live in the confines of her mind, it found its way into her actions. Jung first approached her victim, a 26-year-old woman, through a tutoring app. Her real identity has been kept anonymous due to South Korea's legal protections for victims, but for the purposes of this story, we will refer to her as Hannah. Posing as a mother searching for an English tutor for her 14-year-old daughter, she gained Hannah's trust. The tutor, who was a college student, was looking for extra work to help support herself. The two exchanged messages about tutoring sessions, about availability, and, after a few discussions, they agreed on a meeting. But there was something Jung never revealed. She was not the mother of a teenager. She was not the person she claimed to be. She was the predator. On May 26, 2023, Jung arrived at Hannah's apartment dressed in a middle school uniform, an outfit she had specifically purchased for this moment, for this deception. So she didn't look like a killer. She didn't even look like a young woman trying to pull off a lie. But she was, and she had a plan, one that was about to unfold in the most evil way imaginable. The CCTV footage captured Jung's arrival at the tutor's apartment at 5:30 p.m. She stood in front of the building, her short bobbed hair bouncing as she walked toward the door. A picture of innocence, she didn't seem out of place at all. She rang the bell, and when Hannah opened the door, she stepped inside, posing as the middle schooler's mother. Everything about her seemed normal. There was no sense of the horror that would soon take place behind that door. Once inside, the calm and uneventful atmosphere of the apartment quickly turned violent. With a sudden, brutal ferocity, Jung attacked Hannah. She had no weapons on display, no warning signs, but she had carefully prepared. Armed with a knife, she began stabbing Hannah over and over again. Over 100 times, she drove the blade into her victim, focusing on specific areas: the neck, the chest, the areas she had researched so thoroughly in her obsessive fixation on murder. And even after Hannah had already died, Jung didn't stop, her actions cold and detached, as if following some twisted script in her mind. However, the discovery of the crime came not with a dramatic confrontation or a moment of frantic searching, but with a disturbing sense of unease. Hours after the murder, Jung took actions that indicated her calculated approach to hiding the evidence. She purchased cleaning supplies, a set of knives, and garbage bags, each item chosen for its role in her disturbing plan. Her next steps were deliberate. Instead of simply leaving the scene, she returned to the apartment. Not to face the horror she had committed, but to clean up and dismember the body. The fact that she knew exactly what tools to use, what supplies to gather, and what steps to take revealed an alarming level of preparation. And then, with the body parts towed away in a suitcase, Jung called for a taxi around 3 a.m. She instructed the driver to take her to a remote park area, far from the apartment where she had committed the crime. The suitcase, heavy with its gruesome contents, was an obvious burden to carry, but Jung seemed unconcerned. There was no visible panic, no sign of the emotional turmoil that usually accompanies such a violent act. In fact, her behavior seemed almost casual, as though she was running an errand, not involved in transporting human remains. But as Jung entered the taxi, something about her actions caught the driver's attention. It wasn't her calmness that struck him as odd, but the weight of the suitcase. When he picked her up, the bag had been heavy, but when she returned to the car after a brief stop in the park, it was markedly lighter. His suspicion began to grow as he noticed the unusual nature of her journey. After all, what kind of person, especially a young woman, would be out in the park at such an hour with a suitcase? He started to feel uneasy, but he didn't say anything immediately. He drove her quietly to her destination, but something didn't feel right, and he knew that this wasn't a typical fare. Instinctively, the taxi driver felt the need to act. He called the police and the investigation took its first turn. The authorities quickly traced the suitcase back to the body that Jung had so carefully discarded in the park. Within hours, the police connected the dots, and the investigation into Jung Yoo-jeong began. When Jung Yoo-jeong was first arrested, she quickly crafted a story. In her initial testimony, she claimed that when she arrived at the victim's apartment, she found that the tutor, Hannah, was already dead. According to Jung, a mysterious stranger had killed her before Jung arrived and left the apartment. She alleged that the stranger had told her, "If you help dispose of the body, you can live in her identity." This story had holes from the start, but Jung stood by it. She even went as far as to describe the alleged killer as a man, but no evidence of a second person was found at the crime scene. As investigators pressed her, the contradictions started. When the police questioned her further, Jung changed her story once again. This time she claimed that she had gone to the apartment pretending to be a middle school student, as she felt embarrassed about her age. According to her, she was too old to seek tutoring as an adult, so she decided to pose as a younger person. She explained that when she met Hannah, they argued about the curriculum, and in a fit of rage, she murdered the tutor. This explanation was equally flimsy. Jung's obsession with pretending to be younger, especially at the age of 23, raised more questions than it answered. Her story about the argument didn't explain the brutality of the attack, nor the fact that she had been meticulously planning the murder, including searching for potential victims online. When authorities didn't believe her second story, Jung pivoted to an even more outrageous lie. She claimed that the remains in the suitcase weren't from a victim at all. They were from a baby she had just delivered in secret. Jung insisted that she didn't want to be a mother and that she had killed her baby and disposed of the remains. The lie was quickly exposed as a fabrication. The police confirmed through medical examinations that there was no evidence Jung had recently given birth. The absence of any physical signs of pregnancy, along with the fact that no baby's remains were found, made it clear that Jung had concocted this story to buy herself some time. However, as the investigation continued, more disturbing details emerged. It was discovered that Jung had been chatting with multiple English tutors prior to the murder. She had reached out to over 50 tutors, engaging them in conversations about their availability for tutoring, but also asking some unsettling questions. One of the more common questions she asked was, "Do you live alone?" which seemed to be a sign that she was looking for vulnerable victims. Experts speculated that Jung was specifically drawn to English tutors, possibly because of her own insecurities about her lack of fluency in English. It was thought that she might have harbored resentment towards those who had mastered the language, especially since she had never been able to do so herself. The obsession with English-speaking tutors suggested that Jung saw them as symbols of something she wanted to be, but could never achieve. And when Jung's grandfather was informed of her arrest, the news shattered him. For years, he had been her sole caregiver, raising her in a small home with love and devotion. Upon hearing about her arrest, Jung's grandfather immediately rushed to the police station. His world was crumbling around him as he faced the reality that the child he had nurtured, the young woman he thought of as his pride, was a murderer. Tears filled his eyes as he approached Jung in the interrogation room. He begged her to tell the truth. He pleaded with her, asking her to confess to her crimes and take responsibility. In a voice full of pain, he asked, "Why, Jung? Why did you do this?" The emotional weight of the moment was palpable, and Jung's grandfather was clearly devastated, unable to comprehend how things had gone so terribly wrong. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was simply the realization that her life had reached its breaking point. But she did confess, offering a short, almost robotic apology to her family and the victim's family. But one of the more troubling elements that emerged was her obsession with a psychological thriller, the 2012 South Korean film Helpless. The movie tells the story of a husband who searches desperately for his wife after she disappears. He later discovers that she had been living under a false identity, possibly as a murderer, and had stolen another woman's life. Jung had watched Helpless multiple times before the crime. In fact, she even referenced the film during her interrogations. She admitted to investigators that she was drawn to the movie because it explored the idea of stealing someone else's identity. Psychologists speculated that part of her motive might have been driven by envy. Hannah, the victim, was a young, successful English tutor, and Jung might have seen her as an embodiment of the life she wished she had, independent, capable, and socially engaged. By murdering her, Jung might have believed she could become her, just as she had envisioned after watching Helpless. But that's not all. As the investigation into Jung Yoo-jeong's crime continued, authorities turned to psychological experts to better understand her motives and mental state. They administered a psychopathy test, which is a standard evaluation used to assess individuals for traits typically associated with violent criminals, particularly those with a complete lack of empathy and emotional detachment. The test used was Dr. Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist, a widely recognized tool for measuring psychopathy. The test evaluates 20 traits, including aspects like manipulativeness, lack of remorse, superficial charm, emotional detachment, and impulsivity. The higher the score, the more likely an individual is to display psychopathic tendencies. When Jung was evaluated, the results were striking. She scored a 28 out of 40, a score that is above the threshold for psychopathy, indicating a strong likelihood of psychopathic traits. For comparison, Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers, scored a 39 on the same test, and John Wayne Gacy, the infamous killer clown, scored a 27. Jung's score was not just slightly above the threshold, it was high enough to place her in the category of violent offenders, making her one of the few cases in South Korea with such a clear psychopathic diagnosis. Experts highlighted several key characteristics of Jung's behavior that were aligned with psychopathy. Most notable was her complete lack of remorse. Even after committing such a brutal crime, Jung displayed no visible signs of guilt or distress. When she was arrested, her calm demeanor seemed almost disconnected from the violence she had just carried out. Her reaction to the crime, her nonchalance about what had occurred, was questionable. Even after she had dismembered Hannah's body and scattered the remains, Jung didn't seem fazed. She went about her business, picking up supplies, returning to the scene, and even carrying on conversations with the taxi driver as if nothing had happened. Psychiatrists pointed out that emotional detachment like this is a hallmark of psychopathy. For someone with these traits, the violence she committed was not about passion or anger. It was about the sheer curiosity of what it felt like to kill. Her obsession with true crime documentaries and the fact that she watched them obsessively before committing the crime was seen as a key factor in her psychopathy. It was clear that Jung was fascinated not just by the stories of killers, but by the emotional detachment of those killers. She wanted to understand what it felt like to be them. This wasn't an act of desperation or a fit of rage. This was about satisfying a deep, dark curiosity. One of the more chilling insights was the fact that Jung had studied the methods of murder. She had researched how to get rid of a body and even watched videos on how to commit murder. This premeditation showed that she wasn't acting impulsively. She had thought through her actions carefully, demonstrating a level of cold calculation that is often seen in psychopathic behavior. While Jung's psychopathy was evident, experts still weren't entirely sure why she chose to murder a woman much like herself. But the question is, could the seeds of Jung Yoo-jeong's violent detachment have been planted in her early years? Jung Yoo-jeong was raised by her grandfather after her parents disappeared from her life. He was her only caregiver, a man who loved her deeply and did his best to provide for her. But as Jung grew older, the void left by her parents grew larger, and so did her disconnection from the world around her. Living with her grandfather didn't stop her from retreating further into herself. She frequently told her grandfather that she was studying for the government exams or spending long hours at the library. But the truth was, Jung never left her room. She rarely interacted with anyone and didn't seek out a career. The story she crafted about the library was an illusion, one she used to deflect her grandfather's growing concern about her lack of social interaction or job prospects. At 18, Jung sought to break her isolation by applying for a job as a golf caddy. She wanted to get out of the house, earn money, and perhaps even begin interacting with the world. But her application process revealed more about her than she realized. During her interview, she was almost entirely silent, answering questions only with the briefest yes or no. Her lack of engagement struck the interviewer as odd and unprofessional. Despite this awkward encounter, Jung reapplied multiple times. When she didn't get the job, she called the company, demanding an explanation. She was upset, frustrated, and angry, but not at herself. She blamed the company for not hiring her. When they explained that they were looking for someone proficient in English, Jung lashed out, cursing at them for rejecting her. At school, Jung's isolation was more than just a quiet demeanor. It was a complete emotional and social absence. Her classmates described her as a ghost, present in body but not in spirit. During class, she would position herself behind a curtain, effectively barricading herself from everyone else. Despite sitting in class, Jung managed to make herself invisible. Her classmates would see her legs peeking out from behind the curtain, but attempts to engage her were met with silence. If she did speak, it was only with one-word answers. Yes or no. She ate her lunch alone, hiding behind the curtain, chewing quietly but never interacting. However, unlike many other cases where children were withdrawn because they were bullied, there was no record of her going through such experiences. After the police arrested Jung Yoo-jeong and the details of her crime began to unfold, the taxi driver, who had unknowingly transported the remains of Hannah, was called in by the authorities to receive an award for his role in helping solve the case. The authorities recognized his quick thinking and the courage he showed in calling the police after he had sensed something was off about Jung's behavior. However, the driver declined the award. His decision wasn't just about modesty, it was about something deeper. The trauma from that night haunted him. The images of Jung, the suitcase, and the way she had acted before and after the murder weighed heavily on his mind. And for days after the incident, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been terribly wrong, and the reality that he had unknowingly helped a killer transport human remains disturbed him to his core. As time went on, rumors began to circulate about the taxi driver. Some said he had quit his job entirely, unable to cope with the emotional toll of the incident. The stress and anxiety of that night, and the deep, visceral fear of potentially crossing paths with Jung Yoo-jeong again, had left him unable to continue working. His colleagues recalled how he had grown increasingly withdrawn and quiet, visibly disturbed by the events that had unfolded. He had seen many strange things as a taxi driver, but this was beyond anything he could have ever imagined. On November 24, 2023, the Busan District Court delivered its verdict. Jung Yoo-jeong, after being charged with murder, dismemberment, and abandonment of a body, was found guilty of all charges. As she stood in court, the gravity of her crimes began to sink in. The media swarmed the courtroom, and the public's gaze was fixed on the 23-year-old woman whose actions had horrified an entire nation. However, she showed no visible emotion, maintaining the same indifferent expression she had displayed during her arrest. Some even questioned whether she understood the severity of her actions. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, citing Jung's complete lack of remorse and the chilling nature of her crime. They argued that her methodical actions, from selecting a vulnerable victim to meticulously dismembering the body, reflected an utter detachment from human life. She was, in their eyes, a danger to society, incapable of rehabilitation. However, Jung's defense team argued for a more lenient sentence. They claimed she had suffered from a psychotic break, influenced by her obsession with true crime and her growing detachment from reality. They pointed to her childhood trauma, the absence of her parents, and her years of isolation as factors that might have contributed to her inability to empathize. During the trial, a surprising turn of events occurred. Jung's grandfather, who had raised her after her parents' disappearance, was called to testify. When he entered the courtroom, the elderly man broke down in tears. He had spent his entire life trying to care for his granddaughter, and the realization that she was capable of such violence left him devastated. Jung was sentenced to life imprisonment and would be required to wear a location tracking device for 30 years. The prosecution, still shocked by the brutality of the crime, pushed for the death penalty. On March 27, 2024, the Busan High Court reviewed the case. After considering all arguments, they decided to uphold the life sentence, rejecting the prosecution's request for the death penalty. The ruling was seen as a compromise, recognizing the horrific nature of the crime, but also acknowledging the possibility of her troubled mental state. Then on June 13, 2024, the Supreme Court of Korea confirmed the ruling. The highest court in the land upheld the life sentence, and the 30-year tracking order. There would be no further legal battles, and Jung's fate was sealed. Jung's future would be spent in prison, her every move tracked. Her crime left the country shaken, a chilling reminder of how someone who appeared normal could turn into a cold-blooded killer. The trial was widely covered in the media, with public opinion sharply divided. Many believed that Jung's sentence was too lenient, considering the brutal nature of her crime. Others pointed to her troubled upbringing and mental health struggles, questioning whether she could ever be truly rehabilitated. But one thing was clear: Jung Yoo-jeong's story had left an indelible mark on South Korean society, sparking debates about mental illness, crime, and the responsibilities of the media. Now we'd like to hear from you. What do you think could have been done to prevent something like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. We read every single one of them. And if this story moved you, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth true crime stories just like this one. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself and stay safe. Cheers.